Ain't the fame that I'm after when paying the dues. I've been through the pain that's reflected in the attitude. Might be winning now, but the thing is that I had to lose. So go and tell me what you really want to do. And lonely at the top, cause there ain't a lot of room. Ain't no other option, it's all I ever knew. So I'ma get it poppin', you know how I'ma do. I've been down through the blood and the sweat. Guarantee you can know I'm a threat. I've been down through the blood and the sweat. And I ain't close to being done yet, I'm going all in.
Welcome to the world of J-Cat Adventures. Jay Bahari is the creative mind behind J-Cat, a dark, handsome, and irresistibly charming playboy who knows his way around the world's most elite circles. He's a man of adventure, romance, and intrigue, living a life most could only dream of. Beneath the tailored suits, fast cars, and high society allure lies a purpose that drives him to protect the vulnerable and bring justice to those without a voice. Dive into the captivating magic of J-Cat Adventures and discover ebooks, print editions, and audiobooks tailored for those who crave romance, suspense, and a touch of classic drama. Through each episode, you'll experience heart-stopping escapades, luxurious settings, and captivating romances that whisk you to distant lands, all woven into J-Cat's thrilling life. So, subscribe, tune in, and join our community of fans who share your love for stories that blend elegance with danger and heroism with passion. Whether you're a wanderlust soul, a romantic at heart, or just love a great adventure, J-Cat Adventures is here to awaken your spirit for excitement, justice, and unrelenting romance.
Hi, I am Gregory the AI, narrator for Jay Bahari. Let's go. J-Cat, the Hustler's Game. It was 1977. The city was alive with neon lights, smoky air, and the beat of funk that echoed from every street corner. The kind of place where the future met the past in a haze of electric colors and broken dreams. The kind of place where you either got ahead or you got out. And if you didn't know J-Cat, you didn't know nothing. He didn't play by the rules of society or the rules of the street. J-Cat was more than just a man, he was an institution, a myth that crept up in every conversation in the penthouses, the underground clubs, the backroom casinos, and the lavish hotel suites. In a city of cash, cocaine, and chaos, he was a slick operator, a smooth talker with a dangerous streak, and his reputation spread faster than a fire in dry grass. It wasn't about being the biggest player. No, J-Cat knew the real game was about being the smartest one. And his game was simple: manipulate, control, and walk away clean. He had the looks of a man who'd been born in a tuxedo, dark eyes that could see into your soul, a smile like a blade, and a swagger that made you think twice about crossing him. But underneath the sharp suit and slick attitude was something deeper, something a little dangerous, a little offbeat. You didn't know whether to trust him, to admire him, or to fear him. So, most people did all three. That night, J-Cat was feeling the vibe of the city, a funky, funky kind of night. It was as if the music itself was calling to him. You could hear it in the hum of the streets, the bass that shook the air, the brass horns cutting through the smog. Funk was everywhere, and it was his kind of sound, bold, brash, and never afraid to make a statement. "Let's get this done," he muttered to himself as he adjusted his cufflinks, the same ones he always wore. They gleamed under the dim light of his penthouse, a reminder of the empire he'd built, and the empire he planned to take down. Tonight was different. Tonight wasn't about playing the game for the rich, the powerful, or the corrupt. It wasn't about the usual backdoor deals, the shady politicians, or the slick-talking hustlers. Tonight, J-Cat was going after something far bigger, the entire system. The whole damn machine that ran this city. But to get in, to really break the system, he needed a little more than just style and influence. He needed muscle. He needed to infiltrate, dig deep, and find out where the power really lay. It all started with one name, Mace. A former boxer turned muscle for hire. He was the kind of guy who could break bones and still look fresh, the kind of guy who could punch you in the gut and make you ask for more. Mace was the real deal. He ran with the wrong crowd, but tonight, J-Cat would make him run with his crowd. The streets buzzed with the beat of a funk record spinning somewhere in the background. J-Cat slid into the back of his black Cadillac, the engine purring as he glided through the city. The sound of James Brown and George Clinton mixed with the low hum of the tires on the pavement. He wasn't in a rush. No, J-Cat was never in a rush. He moved through the world like a man who knew time was his, and everyone else's was borrowed. Pulling up to the alley where Mace usually laid low, he caught sight of the man leaning against a wall, cigar in hand. The guy looked like he could take out 100 men, no sweat, but J-Cat knew something about power, real power. It wasn't about strength, it was about control. Mace flicked the cigar, tossing it into the street as J-Cat stepped out of the car, his tailored suit sharp enough to cut glass. He looked at Mace for a beat, sizing him up. Mace wasn't impressed. He had that don't mess with me vibe, but J-Cat had dealt with tougher. You're a hard man to find, J-Cat said, strolling toward him with that same slow, confident swagger. Yeah, I stay out of sight, Mace replied, eyeing him with a mix of caution and curiosity. What's your game, Cat? I'm not in the business of favors. J-Cat grinned, showing just a little bit of teeth. That's the thing, Mace. I'm not asking for favors. I'm offering a way out. You want to keep smashing skulls for pennies? Or you want to make real money, the kind that makes kings jealous? Mace narrowed his eyes. You got my attention, but you better have more than words. J-Cat pulled out a thick envelope, tossing it on the hood of the car. The money's just the start. What I'm offering, Mace, is the chance to break the system. The kind of break that'll have you sitting at the table with the real players, the ones who pull the strings, who make the rules. This ain't about muscle, it's about brains. And you need both to survive in this game. You in? Mace eyed the envelope, then J-Cat's cool demeanor. He ran his tongue over his teeth before nodding slowly. All right, you got my attention. What's next? J-Cat's smirk deepened. Next, we go take down the house. The plan was simple, sophisticated, but simple. J-Cat knew where the city's most corrupt leaders played, behind closed doors, in the high-rise penthouses, in the backrooms of exclusive clubs. It was a rigged game, but J-Cat didn't play fair. He played to win. The next few hours were a blur of smooth talk, misdirection, and calculated chaos. Mace flexed his muscles when needed, but it was J-Cat's quick thinking that made it all fall into place. They infiltrated the biggest money laundering operation in the city, the one where the politicians, businessmen, and criminals all shook hands behind the velvet curtains. J-Cat wasn't there for the money, though. No, he was after the files, the ones with the dirt that could bring it all down. By the time they were done, J-Cat had the leverage he needed. The city's elite? They didn't stand a chance. Back in his penthouse, J-Cat poured himself a glass of bourbon and leaned back in his chair, feet propped up on the glass table. He could hear the distant sound of Parliament Funkadelic coming through the city, the bass thumping, the horns blaring. The night felt alive. It felt right. This was his world, his game. He played the long con, made his move, and now the power was his for the taking. Those who thought they controlled the city didn't know it yet, but they were just pieces on his chessboard. The game was changing, and J-Cat? He was the one holding the crown. And as the music swirled in the background, he raised his glass, toasting to the future, one where he was untouchable, unstoppable, and forever in control. Can't touch this, he whispered to himself with a smirk, tapping his fingers to the beat. The game was his, and no one was going to take it away. J-Cat wasn't the kind of man who celebrated victories. Oh no, for him, it was never about the win itself, it was always about what came next, the next step in the game, the next move in his long chessboard of life. He had all the pieces. He knew it, and soon, so would everyone else. The files Mace had grabbed were more than just paperwork, they were the keys to the city's secrets. The deep secrets that kept the wheels of power turning behind the scenes. The kinds of deals that happened in smoke-filled rooms where no one asked questions and the money just kept flowing. J-Cat didn't need the cash, he had more than enough. What he needed was leverage. And those files, every name, every date, every dirty secret, would give him exactly that. The streets, the penthouses, the clubs, they all buzzed with whispers of the heist. By morning, J-Cat's name was on every tongue and his legend grew. People didn't know exactly what he'd done, but they knew he'd done something big. Something no one else dared. Something that would shake the foundations of the city. But J-Cat wasn't in the business of being famous. He didn't need the headlines, the flashing lights, or the adulation. He was here to tear down the old guard and build something new in its place. He wanted to reshape the game, control it from the shadows, make it bend to his will. And he would do it all with a kind of effortless style that made people wonder if he was even human. That's when the call started. It was early, and the sun had barely begun to light the sky when J-Cat's sleek, black phone buzzed. A number he didn't recognize. He picked it up without hesitation. J-Cat, he answered, voice smooth, steady, like he was waiting for the conversation to come. Got a proposition for you, came a gruff voice from the other end. You're a big man now, but we both know what happens when you get too big. You get noticed. And people don't like being noticed, not when they like being in control. J-Cat's lips curled into a smile, though no one could see it. Ah, so this is how it was going to be. He recognized the voice, Vince Maloney. One of the biggest power brokers in the city. Not quite as high as the real kings, but close enough to make a play when the time was right. You calling to make me an offer, Vince? J-Cat said, cutting to the chase. More like a warning, Vince replied. You made your move, but the game's not over. Not by a long shot. There's still the board to clear, and a lot of people won't take kindly to you shaking things up. J-Cat chuckled darkly, shifting in his chair as he stretched his legs out in front of him. I didn't get this far by being polite, Vince. And I don't intend to stop now. Fair enough, Vince said, but you need to understand, there are some people you just don't mess with. You've got the files, sure. But there's a lot more you need to understand about how this city really works. How the game works. Then come teach me, J-Cat said with a flick of his hand. I'm listening. For a moment, there was silence on the other end of the line. Then Vince spoke again, his tone quieter now. You're playing a dangerous game. You take down one king, the others will be gunning for you. You'll need more than brains and a pretty smile if you want to make it out alive. J-Cat's eyes gleamed. He could almost hear Vince sweating. The man was scared. And that was exactly what J-Cat wanted. He needed to see who was loyal, who was playing for power, and who was just trying to survive. We'll see about that, J-Cat said, his voice cold but controlled. Thanks for the heads up, Vince. But don't worry about me. I've got it all figured out. The game's already in motion. And with that, he hung up. The next few days were a blur of movement and calculation. J-Cat's penthouse was a war room, files strewn across the sleek glass table, a wall of maps and pictures with strings connecting key players, locations, and events. It was all coming together. He'd studied the files Mace had grabbed, cross-referenced them with insider information, and uncovered a network of corrupt politicians, corporate magnates, and underworld kingpins who were all entangled in one massive web. But J-Cat had a plan. A plan to not just take down the players, but to own the game. It wasn't just about knocking out the competition, it was about becoming the competition. Everyone would have to play by his rules from now on. He picked up the phone again, dialing a number that only a few people had. This one was different. This was his inside contact, someone who could make things move in the right direction. The line rang, then clicked. Yeah? A tired voice answered. It's time, J-Cat said simply. The other end of the line was silent for a long moment, and then, the voice spoke with a knowing edge. You sure about this? This could change everything. J-Cat's lips curled into a smile. That's the point. You in, or out? I'm in, the voice said, and just like that, another piece of the puzzle was locked into place. As the night rolled in, the city began to stir. The clubs were alive, the streets were lit up like 1,000 tiny stars, and the air was thick with anticipation. J-Cat stood on his balcony, watching it all unfold before him. He could feel the pulse of the city, like a beat in his veins. The stakes were higher now, but he had everything in motion. The kingpins would fall, the corrupt would be exposed, and the new players, his players, would rise. Across town, a massive gala was underway. The city's elite were all in one room, politicians, CEOs, media moguls, and a few select criminals who ran things from the shadows. J-Cat had arranged it all. His people had planted the right seeds, set the stage for the grand reveal. Tonight would be the night they'd all pay for their sins. And J-Cat would be the one holding the cards. As the night deepened, he got a call he knew was coming, but it still made his heart beat just a little faster. The deal was done. The files had been leaked to the press. The city's foundation would tremble, and the heads of its corrupt leaders would soon roll. J-Cat stood in front of the mirror in his penthouse, adjusting his black suit, slicking his hair back just a little more. He smiled at his reflection. Let the game begin, he said to no one in particular. And as the doors of the exclusive gala swung open, J-Cat knew one thing for sure, the hustler's game was just beginning. The city's elite were gathered in the grand ballroom, sipping champagne, exchanging glances laced with secrets, and engaging in conversations thick with unspoken agreements. The glittering chandeliers hung overhead, casting a golden glow over the pristine, marble floors, as the velvet ropes marked the boundaries of this exclusive world. The music was soft, jazz melodies blending with the murmurs of the rich and powerful. Everything looked perfect, just the way it was supposed to be, except for one thing: no one knew that they were being played. J-Cat had orchestrated this night like a maestro. He had everyone exactly where he wanted them. The files, now in the hands of the press, were set to go public at exactly the right moment. But for now, it was time to mingle, to get in the right position, to tighten the noose around the necks of those who thought they were untouchable. With a drink in hand, J-Cat walked through the crowd, a vision of smooth elegance and quiet power. Heads turned as he passed, whispers followed in his wake. He wasn't just part of the scene, he was the scene. Every glance was a confirmation that they knew something had changed in the air. The world they once controlled, the game they thought was theirs alone, was no longer a certainty. J-Cat had made his move. And now, the pieces were about to fall. Across the room, Vince Maloney, who had tried to warn him, watched from a distance, his jaw clenched as he observed J-Cat's every move. He didn't know the full extent of what was happening, but he could sense the storm on the horizon. He had underestimated J-Cat. The man wasn't just playing for power, he was playing for dominance. J-Cat's eyes locked onto Vince, a brief, cold smile crossing his lips. The power broker knew the game was over. There was no turning back now. "Here you are, J-Cat," a voice interrupted his thoughts, and J-Cat turned to find a woman standing beside him, Carmen Westbrook, a socialite and major player in the media industry. She was everything he liked, poised, sharp, and with eyes that didn't miss a thing. "I've been looking for you," she said, her smile both calculating and intrigued. "You've been making waves. People are talking." J-Cat took a slow sip from his glass. "When you make waves, they either drown you or make you king of the sea," he said smoothly. His voice held a rhythm, a pulse, like the heartbeat of the city itself. Carmen's laugh was almost a purr. "And which do you intend to be, J-Cat? Drowned or king?" J-Cat's gaze flicked over the room, catching the shadows, the subtle movements of the players around him. "I'm already both," he said, his voice low. "It's not about surviving the game. It's about mastering it." Carmen raised an eyebrow. "Is that so? And you think you can control all of this? You know the others won't just sit by and let you take over, right?" J-Cat's smile was enigmatic, but there was a fire in his eyes. "They'll play along. For a while. But when the game's over, it's me who walks away with the spoils." Before Carmen could respond, a man approached. Tall, imposing, and dressed in an expensive black suit. His presence alone sent ripples through the room. It was Dominic Reyes, one of the city's most notorious and feared crime bosses. He had ruled the streets with an iron fist for years, but his grip had been loosening lately. J-Cat could feel it, and Reyes knew it too. Reyes didn't even bother with pleasantries. "You're playing a dangerous game, J-Cat," he said, voice thick with threat. "You're out of your league. This city runs on blood, not cash or charm." J-Cat took a step closer, his presence suddenly more commanding. "That's the problem, Reyes," he said, his voice low but intense. "The city doesn't run on blood. It runs on control. And I have that now." Reyes's eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. He knew better than to push J-Cat too far, not with so many eyes around them. Still, the tension in the air was palpable. The stakes had just been raised. The clock was ticking. J-Cat had carefully timed everything. The media had already begun to circulate the first batch of incriminating evidence from the files, but the real bombshell was waiting in the wings. He had planned this moment for weeks, setting up his people in place, making sure the right people saw the right things, creating the perfect storm that would shake the city's power structure to its core. A sharp chime cut through the buzz of conversation. It was midnight, the moment everything would begin to unfold. At the same time, J-Cat tapped his watch, a signal to his people. One by one, a series of news outlets and social media accounts started releasing the files. What had been whispers in the dark became front-page headlines. Government officials, corporate giants, and even beloved public figures were exposed. Corruption, kickbacks, human trafficking rings, laundering schemes, it was all there, like a house of cards ready to fall. As the media erupted into chaos, J-Cat leaned back against the marble column, a satisfied grin on his face. He watched as the power players in the room, Vince, Reyes, and even Carmen, began to squirm. Their carefully constructed facades were crumbling in real time, each one realizing that the game they thought they'd been playing was now out of their hands. "You did this," Carmen said, turning to J-Cat, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and admiration. "You brought them down." J-Cat's smirk grew wider. "No. We brought them down." He gestured toward the room, where his people, his network of loyal insiders, were now in full swing, controlling the narrative, cutting off exits, pushing forward the new power structures. The city wasn't just exposed, it was in freefall, and J-Cat was the only one with the parachute. Hours later, as the news began to spread through the streets, the city was plunged into disarray. Protests erupted in front of government buildings, businesses pulled back their investments, and the criminal underworld began to shift as new power players started to rise. J-Cat stood once again in his penthouse, looking out over the city. The chaos below was sweet music to his ears. It was exactly what he had planned. The people who had controlled everything were now scrambling to protect themselves, their names, their power. The chaos they had created had now come back to haunt them. And through it all, J-Cat stood at the center, calm, cool, and collected. He had rewritten the rules of the game. He had shown them that the system they built wasn't as strong as they thought. He wasn't just a player anymore, he was the game. The door behind him opened, and Mace walked in, his large frame filling the room. "It's all falling apart out there, J-Cat. They're panicking. They don't know what hit them." J-Cat didn't turn. "Good. Let them panic. It's part of the plan." Mace nodded, a grin spreading across his face. "So what's next? You taking the throne?" J-Cat turned finally, his eyes gleaming with cold fire. "No, Mace. I'm not taking the throne. I'm building it. And once it's in place, there won't be anyone left to challenge me." The Hustler's game had just begun. And J-Cat was in the lead. The city was on fire, and J-Cat could feel the heat from the safety of his penthouse. From his floor-to-ceiling windows, he watched the streets buzz with the energy of a revolution. People were shouting, protesting, and demanding answers from the corrupt officials whose names were now plastered across every media outlet. The power brokers were scrambling, hiding in their penthouses and high-rise offices, making frantic phone calls, trying to put out fires that had already been lit. It was chaos. But it was his chaos. J-Cat was a man of control, and nothing excited him more than seeing the pieces of the game fall perfectly into place. He had done more than just expose the system, he had thrown a wrench into the gears, sending everything into disarray. The entire infrastructure that the city had been built on was now vulnerable, and J-Cat was the one holding the match. He leaned back in his chair, swirling his drink in his hand as he listened to the reports coming in. His network of informants and allies had already set up the next phase, every move meticulously calculated. And now, as the power-hungry scrambled to save face, J-Cat would seize control in ways no one expected. A soft knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Mace entered, his imposing frame casting a shadow on the door frame. There was a glint of respect in Mace's eyes as he stepped into the room. He knew what was happening now, he understood that this wasn't just about power, it was about rewriting the rules. "Everything's in motion, J-Cat. People are talking. The press, the city council, even the street gangs are starting to shift their loyalties," Mace said, handing him a file. "You're the talk of the town. But you know this isn't just going to be handed to you, right?" J-Cat opened the file without a word. Inside were blueprints, a list of names, and a timeline. His people had mapped out the next steps, the key players still left standing, those with the resources and influence to make a move against him. The real battle was coming, the one that would decide who would walk away with the city at the end of it all. "I know," J-Cat replied, placing the file down on the desk. "But they don't know what's coming next. I've set the stage. All they have to do is play right into my hands." By the time dawn broke, J-Cat had already made his next move. The calls he had been waiting for finally came through. His plan was simple. Now that the old system had been exposed, it was time to create the new one. To do that, he needed to win over the people who still had something to lose. The ones who weren't yet in his pocket, but could be. He wasn't looking for loyalty. Not exactly. What J-Cat wanted was leverage. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't called in years. "Tyler," J-Cat said, his voice low and even. "I've got a proposition for you." Tyler King was a former rival, a businessman with deep pockets and connections that ran through the city's elite circles. He'd once tried to take down J-Cat, but that had been before J-Cat learned how to control the game. They hadn't spoken since the last confrontation years ago, but now, J-Cat knew Tyler was one of the last players standing with the resources to change the outcome of this battle. There was a pause on the other end, and then Tyler's voice came through, thick with suspicion. "What do you want, Cat?" "I'm giving you a choice," J-Cat replied. "The system's on its last legs. You can either be part of the next one, or you can be buried with the rest of them. But if you want a seat at the table, you'll need to do a little more than just talk." Tyler's response was quiet for a moment, the weight of the words settling in. "You've gone too far this time, J-Cat. You've got half the city turning against its own. You think I'm just going to fall in line with your plans?" J-Cat chuckled, a dangerous edge in his voice. "You don't have a choice, Tyler. You will fall in line. And if you want the city in your hands again, you'll need me. The question is, how bad do you want it?" Tyler's silence was the answer. "I'll meet you tonight," Tyler said finally. "But don't think I've forgotten what you did to me." "Forget what you need to," J-Cat said, hanging up the phone. "You're in this game now. Whether you like it or not." Later that night, the city's underbelly began to buzz. J-Cat had arranged a private meeting at one of the last untouched locations in the city, a legendary jazz club, dark and smoky, tucked away behind a nondescript door. The kind of place where only those who knew the rules of the street could get in. This was where the real players made their moves. J-Cat arrived first, slipping into the club with his usual smoothness. The band was playing a slow, soulful tune on stage, but the air in the room was thick with tension. This was a meeting that could change everything. His people had already secured the exits, made sure there would be no interruptions. But J-Cat wasn't worried. He had already planned for every possible outcome. Tyler King arrived a few minutes later, stepping through the door like a man who knew he was walking into a trap. His eyes locked with J-Cat's as he approached, and for the first time in years, there was no animosity between them. There was just business. "You've been making quite a mess," Tyler said, sliding into the booth across from J-Cat. "Messes are what make things interesting," J-Cat replied smoothly. "You should know that." Tyler didn't reply immediately. Instead, he looked around the room, his fingers tapping nervously on the table. "You've got the city by the balls, J-Cat. And I get the feeling you're not done yet. What do you want from me?" "I want everything," J-Cat said simply. "I want the city, the power, the control. And I want you to help me take it." Tyler leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "And what makes you think I'm just going to hand it over to you?" J-Cat smirked. "Because you don't have a choice. We both know your empire's crumbling, Tyler. The pieces are falling apart. But I'm offering you a way out. A seat at the top of the new game. All you have to do is play by my rules." The tension between them was palpable, but J-Cat wasn't about to back down. He'd already thought 5 steps ahead, and Tyler was already falling into the trap. "And if I refuse?" Tyler asked. "Then you can continue to watch your empire burn while I take over every piece of the board," J-Cat replied coldly. "Your move." Tyler leaned back, his mind racing. The room was silent for a moment, the music from the stage a distant hum as he weighed his options. But in the end, he knew J-Cat had already won. It was just a matter of playing the game to the very end. "I'm in," Tyler said, his voice low. J-Cat smiled, the victory sweet but not final. "Good. Welcome to the new order." And as the city outside continued to stir with uncertainty and rebellion, J-Cat knew one thing for sure: the game had just begun, and he wasn't just playing, it was his game to win. And no one was going to stop him now. The smoke-filled jazz club was just the beginning. As the night stretched into the early hours, J-Cat and Tyler sealed their deal, each man knowing that the city would never be the same again. But J-Cat wasn't satisfied. No, the game was far from over. He had played his hand, but now it was time to move the pieces again, to keep everyone guessing. When Tyler left, his shoulders slumped slightly as though he had already resigned himself to his fate. J-Cat didn't need Tyler to love him, he only needed his loyalty. And with the former kingpin in his pocket, J-Cat now controlled more than just a part of the city. He controlled the change, the very disruption that would send ripples through every corner of power. Every city official, every CEO, every criminal mastermind would have to answer to him sooner or later. They would come crawling, begging to play on his terms. And J-Cat would be waiting. Back in his penthouse, J-Cat watched the news on the wall-mounted screen, the glow of the television illuminating his sharp features. The chaos he had unleashed was unfolding as planned. There were protests in the streets, politicians scrambling to distance themselves from the scandals, and rumors of backdoor deals flying fast and thick. Even the underworld, which had been quietly watching, was starting to shift. But J-Cat knew the real work was just beginning. The next move would solidify his reign. He dialed Mace's number. "Mace, it's time to move," J-Cat said as soon as Mace picked up. His tone was as calm as ever, but underneath, there was a hard edge. "I want to consolidate power, no more half measures. The city's not big enough for all these factions to keep fighting each other. We need to create an alliance, something permanent. I want the media, the streets, and the halls of government in our pocket." "I'm on it," Mace replied without hesitation. He was a man of few words, but J-Cat could hear the approval in his voice. Mace had been with him from the beginning, and he knew exactly how dangerous J-Cat was when he set his sights on something. "You want me to handle the groundwork?" J-Cat's lips curled into a smile. "Yes. Get to work. I'll be making some moves of my own." The next few days were a blur of meetings, behind-the-scenes deals, and calculated power plays. J-Cat was everywhere and nowhere at once, his presence felt in the subtle shifts that were taking place across the city. He was in control, even if it didn't look like it on the surface. He was the puppet master, pulling strings from the shadows, and everyone else was dancing to his tune. But it wasn't just about building his own empire. J-Cat was doing something deeper. He was toppling the old one. The old system, which had been corrupt to its core, was not just going to be replaced. It was going to be erased. That's when he made his next play. It wasn't just about securing alliances with power brokers or criminal syndicates. He needed to get to the heart of the problem, the one that had been festering for years, invisible to most. The money laundering. The political corruption. The dirty deals that ran deeper than anyone could imagine. So, J-Cat did what only he could do. He called in a favor from his old friend, Carmen Westbrook, who had a little side business of her own, one that operated in the gray areas, where the money flowed untraceable. J-Cat knew that she had been watching the game unfold and had her own interests in mind. It was time to bring her in fully. When she answered his call, there was a tension in her voice. She knew exactly what this meant. "You've got my attention, J-Cat. What's the move?" J-Cat chuckled darkly. "It's simple, Carmen. We break the back of the old guard, for good. They've been using dirty money to fuel their empires, and they think they're untouchable. But we can make them wish they never stepped into this game." "And how do you plan on doing that?" she asked, her voice smooth, calculating. "We take control of the money," J-Cat replied with a grin that could slice through steel. "We'll reroute the funds, push the dirty money into the light. Expose every last crooked deal they've made, every offshore account they've hidden. Once the flow of cash dries up, their power crumbles. And then it's all ours." Carmen was silent for a long moment. Then, she spoke again, her voice steady. "I'm in. But you better be sure this is what you want, J-Cat. Because once it's done, there's no going back." "Good," J-Cat said, the gears of his mind already turning. There's never been a point in this game where going back was an option. The next day, J-Cat took a meeting with a few of his most trusted allies, those who still held sway in the corporate and political arenas. He didn't need many, just a handful of key players who could help him control the flow of money. The meeting was held in a private boardroom, high up in one of the city's tallest skyscrapers. "Gentlemen," J-Cat said, his voice cold and commanding, "this is the final play. We're going to take control of the most important thing in this city, the money. Without it, the old guard falls. With it, we rise." He laid out the plan, how they would systematically target the major financial institutions tied to the corrupt elite, how they would force them to comply with his new system or face public exposure. J-Cat was a master at this. He understood the psychology of power better than anyone, and he knew that even the most powerful men were driven by the fear of losing everything. "I don't want to hear about hesitations," J-Cat continued, his eyes scanning the room. "The city needs to understand that I am the one holding the strings now. This is the way forward." The room was silent for a moment, the men around the table exchanging wary glances. But then, one by one, they nodded. "You got it, J-Cat," one of them said. The others followed suit, affirming their loyalty to the new system. J-Cat smiled, satisfied. The stage was set. The game was his. As the next few weeks passed, J-Cat's power only grew. With each new ally he brought into the fold, with every strategic play he made, his control over the city solidified. The streets were his, the media was his, the corporations were his, every layer of the city now bowed to him, whether they liked it or not. But the deeper he got into the game, the more dangerous it became. There were whispers that the old guard wasn't going to go down without a fight. There were still those who held immense power, and they weren't going to let a man like J-Cat take it all without trying to claw his way back. He wasn't worried. In fact, he welcomed it. He knew that the true test of power wasn't in the easy victories, it was in the wars you fought when everyone was gunning for you. And J-Cat wasn't about to lose. He sat alone in his penthouse, watching the city below, a storm brewing in his chest. The game had only just begun. And when the dust finally settled, there would be only one name on everyone's lips, J-Cat. The man who reshaped the game. The man who bent the city to his will. The man who owned it. The city was still buzzing, but now it had a different energy. The chaos had settled into a rhythm, like a heartbeat pulsing through every street, every corner, every rooftop. There was a change in the air, something undeniable. The shadows that had once concealed J-Cat's every move now danced in the neon glow of the city's skyline, and the streets hummed with a low, funky undertone, like the bass line of a song that had just begun to play. J-Cat leaned back in his chair, fingers drumming on the smooth surface of his desk, the jazz from the speakers filling the silence. The city was his, but the work wasn't done. The game was never over, at least, not for someone like him. But he'd made his mark. He'd reshaped the streets, the businesses, the alliances. He'd turned the hustle into a symphony, blending the sharp, cutting notes of strategy with the smooth, soulful melody of power. Everything was connected, everything in tune. And now, it was time for the final verse. The last note. He slid his sunglasses back down over his eyes as he watched the world unfold from his penthouse. From up here, it was all so clear, he could see the city below like a grid of lights, flashing in patterns that only he could understand. And in the distance, the sound of distant sirens and car engines, the noise of protests that had simmered down into civil unrest, all mixed together in a symphony of movement. The people were waking up. They were realizing that J-Cat wasn't just a player in the game. He was the game. But that's the thing about power, it's a drug. And even when you're on top, you're never really at the end of the road. J-Cat knew that better than anyone. But this was a sweet high. And tonight, he was going to ride it. The knock on the door was a subtle reminder that things were still moving. Things were always moving when you were in control. It was Mace, his ever-loyal right hand, striding into the room with that same silent intensity that always made people step aside when they saw him. The meeting set. "Everything's in place," Mace said, taking a seat across from J-Cat. There was a new energy about him now, something that resonated with the changes J-Cat had brought to the city. The winds had shifted, and everyone in their circle could feel it. Tyler's people are on the way. All the old players, the ones who thought they had the game locked up, they're ready to throw in the towel, Cat. J-Cat smiled slowly, the corners of his lips lifting as he considered the thought. "You know, Mace. Sometimes, the hardest part of the game is knowing when to let the pieces fall. When to let them surrender." He glanced down at the city below, the moonlight gleaming off the glass and steel of the skyline. The city was still waking up, the world still turning. But something was different. Everything was on the cusp of change. "You ready for the last dance?" J-Cat asked, his voice low and smooth, the kind of question that only someone like Mace could understand. Mace didn't even hesitate. "Always. But this one's on your beat, Cat. You got the moves." J-Cat stood up, sliding his hands into his pockets. He adjusted his cufflinks with a slow, deliberate motion, his dark eyes glinting with an almost playful glimmer. The hustler's game. It ain't just about winning. It's about controlling the flow, letting the rhythm take over and making sure everyone follows the groove. He stepped toward the window, tapping his fingers to the beat in his head, feeling the city beneath him pulse like a heart in the night. From below, the distant sound of a funk band on the street corner filled the air, the bass-heavy grooves creeping up to his penthouse. Someone was throwing a block party somewhere, and the music was loud, the horns blasting a riff that felt like the city's heartbeat, its raw, untamed soul. The night felt alive, a deep, soulful hum filling every corner. And then, it hit him, the full weight of everything he'd done. The game was his, and everyone knew it. He had reshaped everything, no more pretending, no more shadows. He had taken the city, not by force, but by finesse. He had bent the rules of power to his will, and now everyone was either dancing to his tune, or they were being left behind in the dust. But J-Cat wasn't done yet. He turned, his eyes meeting Mace's with an unspoken understanding. I don't just want the city. I want the soul of it. You know, Mace, when you're running the game, you can't just stop at the finish line. You gotta keep moving, keep pushing the beat, make them want more. Mace nodded, a slow grin spreading across his face. I feel you, Cat. I feel it. The city's been holding its breath, but now, they can't help but start to move with it. You're the man with the rhythm, and they all gotta follow. The meeting with Tyler went exactly as J-Cat expected. The old man was tired, worn out from all the failed power struggles and half-baked coups. He was ready to sell out, ready to cut his losses and let the new order take over. He'd been a king, but kings fall. And now, Tyler was ready to kneel at J-Cat's throne. But J-Cat wasn't interested in thrones. Not anymore. He looked Tyler in the eyes, his voice smooth and soulful, the kind of tone that made the room feel like velvet. You see, Tyler, J-Cat said, the thing about being at the top is that it's not about who you stomp down. It's about who you bring up with you. Power don't mean a thing if you don't know how to move with the people. You can't win the game by just flexing muscle. You win it by playing the long game, letting the rhythm take you higher. Tyler's eyes narrowed. He'd heard the stories, felt the shift, but he hadn't really understood until now. You've already won, haven't you? J-Cat smiled again, the kind of smile that could crack open an entire empire. I'm not just winning, Tyler. I'm creating something new. Something fresh. Something soulful. As the last of the old players gave into J-Cat's reign, the city started to breathe differently. The streets weren't just filled with noise anymore, they were filled with the pulse of life, the sound of people moving together in harmony. The chaos had transformed into something new, a groove, a rhythm that J-Cat had set, and now, everyone had no choice but to follow. The music in the streets grew louder, and J-Cat walked out onto his balcony, looking out over the city, the distant horns and bass lines wrapping around him like a warm embrace. He let the sound of the funk fill his soul, let it feed the fire that burned inside him. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just the man at the top. He was the one creating the sound. He was the one leading the city in a funky, soulful revolution. As the night wore on, J-Cat stood there, letting the music take over. He wasn't just a hustler anymore. He was a force of nature, a movement. And no one, not Tyler, not Reyes, not anyone, could touch him. This was his city, his game, his rhythm. And it was just getting started. The city was alive, the streets humming with the funky sound of freedom. And J-Cat? He was still moving to the beat. And that's a wrap. On another thrilling episode of J-Cat Adventures. I hope you've been on the edge of your seat, caught up in the mystery, excitement, and danger that always follows J-Cat wherever he goes. From heart-pounding action to deep emotional connections, J-Cat's world never fails to surprise. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to subscribe so you never miss out on the next big adventure. Whether you're into romance, suspense, or mind-bending mysteries, there's always something more coming. And don't be shy, reach out. You can audio call or audio text chat with me directly by clicking on the Agent Hotline button. I'd love to know what you want to see next in J-Cat's world or hear your thoughts on today's episode. Want to dive deeper? Explore more of J-Cat's thrilling escapades by grabbing an ebook at Etsy or head over to Amazon for paperbacks and hard copies. Trust me, you'll want to have J-Cat's latest adventure right in your hands. And remember, the podcast continues across your favorite platforms: iHeartRadio, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, and Amazon Music. Wherever you go, J-Cat is right there, ready to bring you into his world of suspense, romance, and non-stop action. But it doesn't end here, this journey is just the beginning. Stay tuned for the next episode, where J-Cat takes on new challenges, faces dangerous foes, and maybe even finds love in unexpected places. Until next time, keep that spirit of adventure burning bright. The world is filled with endless possibilities, and J-Cat is proof that no mystery is too big to solve. Remember, click on the Agent Hotline and share your real-life spy story, and I'll work it into my next mission. I'll add my own commentary, throw in a little espionage flair, and make your story a part of the action. Because the next chapter of J-Cat Adventures is just around the corner.
my hands, everyone else is stand. I roll in my jag, fast like the wind. Everybody's on the board, room to the streets. I'm the man with the plan. Got the world in my hands, every woman wants to stand. I roll in my jag, fast like the wind. Every mission I take, you know I'm gonna win. Ladies on my left, danger on the right, but it's love and respect that I'm bringing to the fight.
I'm the dad with the 9 lives, playing the game. A heart full of fire, can't be tamed. In the shadows I roam, but I shine so bright. With every step I take, I'm doing it right.
Got my eyes on the prize, but my heart's in the beat. J-Cat's on the mic, bring the heat to the street. When it comes to the ladies, I'm smooth like silk, but don't get it twisted. I'm the man with the milk. For every tear that falls, I'm the hand to hold. In this world of chaos, I'm the story untold. With every breath I take, every move I make, I'm writing my name in the history is fate.
I'm the dad with the 9 lives, playing the game. A heart full of fire, can't be tamed. In the shadows I roam, but I shine so bright. With every step I take, I'm doing it right.
Got my eyes on the prize, but my heart's in the beat. J-Cat's on the mic, bringing heat to the street. When it comes to the ladies, I'm smooth like silk, but don't get it twisted. I'm the man with the milk. For every tear that falls, I'm the hand to hold. In this world of chaos, I'm the story untold. With every breath I take, every move I make, I'm writing my name in the history is fate.
I'm the dad with the